Sparkle like a diamond, sneaker Uzi on the Allen, and my army jacket lining hit the earth like a comet invasion. Nazis like the Afrocentric Asian, half man, half amazing. 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 The Afrocentric, 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 Afrocentric.
前回我々が放送した衝撃の報告、それは日本史最大のミステリーだった。
心5歳人がユダヤの神さんだという。
なんと日本の神社にユダヤの神伝説があった。
私は日本に来てからその文化や習慣がイスラエルと極めて似ていることに驚きました。
ミステリーです。
政府要人さえ驚くイスラエルと日本の共通点。さらに
これ見ていただきたいんですけども、ヘブライ文字とですね、カタカナひらがなの類似ということでね、例えば日本のですね「コ」というカタカナがねヘブライ文字とも似てる。あと「カ」「ト」という字も似てますし、
日本語とヘブライ語の不可解な一致、これはただの偶然なのか。日本から遠く1万1000キロ、地中海東岸の国イスラエル国は長い間国を失うという悲しい歴史を持っている。日本では縄文時代末期にあたる紀元前11世紀に建国された古代イスラエル王国。しかし度重なる戦乱で国は滅亡。同時に12のうち10もの種族が国外に逃れ消えてしまった。
失われた実種族はアジア各地に散っていったようなのです。
失われた樹種族が日本に来ていたというのか。我々はその痕跡を日本の古文書の中に見つけ出した。遠くシルクロードの果てから127件もの民を連れてやってきた大集団。その名は旗氏。その正体に迫る1300年前のお宝が残されていた。
ボロボロですもんね。1300年も昔のものでございますから。1300年こういうお面なんです。これ随分鼻が西洋人の顔ですから、鼻の高いお顔ですから、イスラエルかユダヤの神さん旅でのいう話も出てくるわけなんです。
そして今年3月、驚くべき人物が成田に降り立っていた。イスラエルの調査機関アミシャル代表アビハイル氏。彼は世界中に散った樹種族の末裔を DNA 鑑定などにより探索。ミャンマーにいたマナセ族など800名の人々をイスラエルに帰還させている。
今後の調査対象国としてあなた方が暮らす日本も入っているんです。
なんと日本も調査の対象に入っているという。日本に来て真っ先に向かったのは長野県諏訪大社だった。この地に何があるというのか。彼の目に留まったのはモリア山。すると途端に居住まいを正し、山に向かって神妙に祈り始めた。一体このモリア山にはどんな意味があるのか。
モリアという名はイスラエルの神から来ています。私は実子族がこの地に来たと信じています。それが誰なのかは分かりませんが。
そしてついに謎の解明に向け大きく動き出す。日本のルーツは古代イスラエル。ソロモンの秘宝は四国にあった。全てのきっかけは古都京都にあった。日本三大祭りに数えられる祇園祭。1ヶ月間にわたり繰り広げられるまさに日本を代表する祭り。だがこの豪華絢爛な山鉾に多くの謎があることをご存知か。描かれた数々の絵柄を見てあなたは奇妙な印象を受けないだろうか。日本古来の祭りであるはずなのに、 そこにはなぜかバグダッド宮殿、砂漠を行くラクダ、そしてエジプトなどシルクロードを遡る風景がその目で見てきたかのように描かれている。そしてさらに衝撃的なのがこの絵。着飾った男女が亀を手にするこの絵は一体。
イサクに水を供するリベカですね。
イサクに水を供するリベカとは、
旧約聖書の載っている創世記の24章ですか、それにですねたまたまそういう文章がありましてですね。
The Israelites of Japan. Hell of a title, isn't it? This is not a new assertion, as people have been making this claim for a long time. Hebrew and katakana being strikingly similar, the Hatta clan, the Tamura clan, these clans have obvious Jewish derivatives and deviations. Therefore, their descendants are the Jews. Case closed. The end. This is the ridiculousness that plagues the world when trying to define the children of Israel in almost every nation and group of people. They are also notorious for lying about dates and changing times. I will not be referencing any dates that they are trying to fish the masses. It is my goal in this video to make connections that I believe few have made regarding the Japanese. It is my goal to give a voice to the voiceless and to give hope to the hopeless. The story of the Israelites of Japan is something that would interest anyone who is thirsty for knowledge and the truth. Hopefully, after I presented my case, you too will be able to see the poor, needy, and neglected hidden ones of the Isles of the Sea.
Did you know that it's scientifically proven that Native Americans come from Siberia? Since the 18th century, ethnographers and archaeologists have been arguing that there are strong cultural and ethnic similarities between Native Americans and the people of Siberia. So what are those similarities? Well, first of all, appearance and clothes. Apparently, Siberians and Native Americans even look alike. Distinctive cheekbones, an upright posture, and dusky skin. In the 19th century, famous explorer Fridtjof Nansen called Evenks, the indigenous people of eastern Siberia, the Indians of Siberia. Both Siberians and Native Americans dressed themselves in clothes made of deer skin, which makes sense, with deer the main breeding cattle. But what is striking is how similar the ornaments and types of embroidery used to decorate their clothing was. Next, religion and beliefs. Shamanism, belief in the afterlife, and the power of spirits are prevalent for both cultures. Even skin tambourines are used by both Siberian and Indian shamans. In both cultures, they worship the spirit of fire and believe in the world tree as the main pillar of existence. Low alcoholic beverages feature in ceremonies, and while the drinks differ, corned beer for Indians and milk vodka for Siberians, the ritual stays the same. All gather in a circle and drink from one cup, passing it on to the next. Both Siberians and Indians used tattoos as spiritual signs. Their houses looked alike too. Teepees and chums were go-to structures for both Siberians and Native Americans. And then the language. A connection exists between Siberian and Native American languages. In early 18th century, German naturalist Georg Steller, who traveled to Kamchatka and then to North America, argued that either the people of Kamchatka and North America communicated somehow with each other, Or Native Americans are the same people as Kamchadals or are somehow derived from them. After more than a century of speculation, geneticists have proven that Aztecs, Incas, and Iroquois are closely related to the people of Altai, the Siberian region that borders China and Mongolia. Listen to this. Fearless nomadic hunters with strong tribal traditions who believe in the powers of nature and honor spirits of the deceased. This stands true for both native Siberians and Native Americans. Here's some more evidence for you. In 2008, it was confirmed that the language family of Central Siberia shares a mother tongue with dozens of Native American languages. Researcher Edward Vajda spent several years in Siberia studying the almost forgotten Ket language. His research links the Russian Yeniseian family of extinct languages to the Nadene family of languages spoken by the broad group of present-day Athabascan tribes in the US and Canada. Other evidence is based on genetics and archaeological finds. A skeleton of a 4-year-old boy found in South Siberia in the late 1920s led to a fascinating discovery in 2013. These were the oldest human remains from which DNA was extracted. A genetic study of a 24,000-year-old skeleton housed in the Hermitage State Museum in St. Petersburg showed that the boy's DNA had close genetic ties to the DNA of present-day Native Americans. It shows that they carried up to 38% of the genes of the Altai people. But it's not the first archaeological find that suggests that Native Americans and Siberians are related. Let's go back to the 1960s. Soviet historian Nikolai Dikov had found 15,000-year-old human remains in Kamchatka, a region in Russia's Far East. The tomb was unusual for the region. The skeleton was covered in red ochre, just like in the burial traditions of the North American natives. This had led Dikov to believe that ancestors of Native Americans migrated from Siberia. Also, in 2013, two of the world's leading scientific magazines, Nature and Science, published articles about the analysis of whole genomes in Native Americans and their Siberian cousins. The first study analyzed 48 people from Brazil. The second study analyzed 31 genomes from people in the US and Siberia, and the results from both studies confirmed that the ancestors of Native Americans left Siberia about 20 to 30,000 years ago. By the way, scientists already know how humans traveled to the Americas from Altai. Instead of the Bering Strait, there was a land bridge 30,000 years ago because during the Ice Age, much water was locked in glaciers and the levels of world's oceans were much lower. The 2015 research published by Science by Rasmus Nielsen and his colleagues contacted people whose heritage indicated they were of Native American descent. After analyzing their genome, they proved that about 23,000 years ago, a single group from Northeast Asia crossed the Bering Land Bridge. Then they eventually made their way to Alaska and the rest of America. In that same study, famous Russian geneticist Oleg Balanovsky analyzed DNA samples from the Russian biobank. As a result, scientists proved beyond doubt that Native Americans are closely related to the peoples of Altai. But during that study, another discovery was made. Besides Siberian ancestors, some Native Americans showed a puzzling relation to the indigenous people of Australia and Melanesia in the Pacific Ocean, located in an almost opposite part of the planet. All of this was possible only because of the genome studies which compare various DNA markers. So that's it. The assumptions of researchers and scientists are now proven, and we can say with confidence that Native Americans came to their lands from faraway Siberia.
Siberia, Siberia. Why is this a constant explanation for the origin of the Native Americans? While some may fight and dispute the origin of the more oriental tribes of the Native Americans, I am simply looking for what makes sense. While I am of the belief that the Native Americans who were here before any European, North African, or Ethiopian infringement were indeed descendants of the tribes of Israel, I also believe that some of them did indeed come from Asia. I am not going to debate whether these Israelites are of a mixed lineage and were all originally Negroes, nor will I make a case that they always look the way that they do now. The next potential source of contention would come from whether ancient Israel is in the Americas or in the Middle East or somewhere completely different. Personally, I do not subscribe to the land of Israel being in the Americas. Many of these melanated people of ancient America are what the Book of Mormon refers to as the Jaredites. I believe many confuse these people with the Israelites and create doctrines based on them. These melanated giants, who possibly could be related to the red-haired, blue-eyed mound builders of North America, are not Israelites. Instead, these are the lands of Shem, specifically the land of Joseph, where the New Jerusalem will be built. These lands were given to the seed of Joseph, fulfilling their blessing as told in Genesis, and officially promised to them in the Book of Mormon. And while the book of 2nd Esdras explains the arrival of the Northern Kingdom in the Americas, I do not believe that that was the only voyage that took place. If the Book of Mormon tells of the arrival of the Israelites to the Americas as a totally different voyage from 2nd Esdras, then what other voyages could the Most High have given to various scattered tribes around the world that perhaps could have been lost or hidden today?
Our history comes from us emerging from within our Mother Earth, emerging at a place that we call Chimikanakita, Ribbon Falls in the Grand Canyon. From our emergence, we were told to look for the middle place of the world. So we journeyed to different places to find where we are today, which we call Halona Itiwana, the middle place of the world. A lot of who we are is honoring the earth, honoring different things that sustain life. Our ancestors were very resilient and knew that our history, our culture, our way of life was important.
This whole place still looks the same as it was back then. These are ovens that Zuni people use to bake. They can cook turkey or any kind of meal overnight.
There's a lot of things to do here. A few convenience stores and also restaurants here. There is the Zuni Visitor and Information Center for more information about Zuni, about the tours that they have, and things that you can experience while you're here in Zuni.
This is Roger Thomas. I'm the innkeeper here at the Inn at Halona. Visiting Zuni is anchored by some definite very interesting features. Some of them are known worldwide, for example, the local mission church, and also the assembly of craftspeople around here who put up various festivals, monthly and otherwise. The community, first of all, is extremely welcoming.
We appreciate every one of you looking to come to Zuni, and we look forward to seeing you here.
I am doing archaeological tours for the visitor center. My tours take you out to many of our ancestral villages, and one of those is actually going to the 7 cities of Cibola, known by much of the world.
Well, coming up to Zuni has been a lot of fun.
The inn was very nice. The scenery out here is gorgeous.
I had the great pleasure to compose a trip out to Zuni. It is a lovely, charming place to stay.
The Native American village in contemporary times, they are doing a lot of the ceremonial, traditional things, but at the same time they've managed to accommodate this Western lifestyle, and it's a remarkable joint path. Come and witness how they do it.
According to the Zuni tribe, their ancestors were led here by celestial beings. And even tracing immediate DNA, we can see that some Native Americans, now classified as so-called Hispanics and Latinos, seem to have lineage that comes from Asia, or what people specifically say, Siberia. The connection between the Israelites and Siberia will have to wait until maybe a part 2 to this video. But for now, I want to dig into the connection between a few Native American tribes and the indigenous tribes of Japan. The Testament of Gad, chapter 1, verses 34 through 36. For God put upon me a disease of the liver, and had not the prayers of Jacob my father succorned me. It had hardly failed, but my spirit had departed. For by what things a man transgresseth, by that same also he is punished. Since, therefore, my liver was set mercilessly against Joseph, in my liver too I suffered mercilessly, and was judged for 11 months. For so long a time as I had been angry against Joseph. According to this academic article, North American Indians, Canadian Indians, Alaskan Natives, Native Greenlanders are disproportionately affected by chronic liver disease. Could it be that this liver disease or demonic force has traveled through Gad's posterity? I believe that it is a valid question to ask. When studying some of the genetic links to Peruvians, North American Indians, Siberians, and indigenous Japanese people, people from Peru had genetic links to modern populations of both Siberia and the Ainu people, or the indigenous people of North Japan. It is also known that the Kennewick man, the skeletal remains of a prehistoric man found in Kennewick, Washington, is genetically closer to the Ainu than even the Native American tribes. Scientists discovered that both Zuni and the Japanese have similar frequency of blood type B, a rare kind of kidney disease, and very specific oral traditions about their origins. In this picture here, you'll see that the Zuni's sacred rosette up top closely resembles Japan's national symbol, a stylized chrysanthemum on the bottom. The Haida people of Japan have so many striking similarities with Native Americans. From Native American rappers adopting the name Haida from the indigenous Japanese tribe also named Haida, to the similar tribe title of the Innu of Canada and the Ainus of northern Japan. The similarities are uncanny. Japan's island archipelago, stretching north and south along the edge of Asia, was described by Marco Polo as Zipangu, the land of gold. In the 1980s, scientists believed that Japan's old legend of being a land of gold may have been true. They theorized that the gold found in the land is gold that has been formed rather recently, with temperatures ranging from very hot to very cold, along with being a land rich of resources. Which son of Noah did this land originally belong to?
Ainu people used to face an identity crisis, but many are able to work out of the shadow of hiding their ethnic background. Now they are willing to present their traditional dances and singing their own songs.
The band called the Ainu Rebels blends traditional dance and musical forms with rap, hip-hop, and rock. Band members are all Ainu in their 20s and 30s who sing and dance to the pre-recorded music, celebrating their ethnicity in unusual fashion by mixing traditional dress, dance, and language with hip-hop and rap.
We do traditional dance, but mainly we arrange and adapt traditional dance forms, match them to music. We try to incorporate our own forms of Ainu expression into our performances.
For the younger generation Ainus, many still cannot free themselves from the pressure of being stereotyped.
I think the general population held an image of Ainu being poor and dirty. It is an image that I don't think has completely disappeared.
Many people would rather marry non-Ainu people, hoping to dilute indigenous features of the next generation, such as pronounced cheekbones and noses, and among men, more facial hair than the Japanese. Many Ainus also imitate the way local Japanese dress, trying to erase their own unique Ainu style.
I hated being an Ainu. I had no self-confidence. I tried to hide my Ainu identity. I was embarrassed.
But that is slowly changing.
When I saw Canadian indigenous people performing and thought cool, I want to be like them. These were indigenous people from abroad. But really, I wanted to be inspired by my own Ainu people. Now I want to become someone who can influence and inspire the younger generation in the same way that I was influenced and inspired.
The younger generation Ainus use music and dance to express their ethnicity. Ainu outfits, Ainu looks, and Ainu songs and dances are slowly creating a new Ainu identity for the young people. TIT Weekly.
In Japan, it is a belief that there are two main groups of people who are not recent foreigners, who are so-called indigenous to Japan: the Yayoi and the Jomon. The Yayoi are a group of invaders from the cold areas north of Japan and from Korea, who are mostly of the stock of Japhet. The Yayoi are known for having distinct physical features. These would include a flatter, longer face, thinner eyes and lips, thin beards, low face protrusion, low amounts of body hair, and lacking in melanin. The Jomon, on the other hand, have very sharp features. They had a thick, prominent nose bridge, wide noses, a light copper tint of skin to high yellow, high cheekbones, full beards, thick lips, body hair, big bushy hair, bushy eyebrows, and heavy face protrusion. It is almost day and night how different these two groups truly were. After the various invasions of these other peoples, the Jomon were heavily absorbed into the Yayoi archetype. Others were killed or pushed out into neighboring islands. You could say that they were scattered. There have been various debates on who the Jomon people originally were. Theories claim that these were simply a Caucasian race of people, as they had so-called Caucasian features. With the help of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, the so-called Caucasians claim many of these features for themselves. Having a thinner, prominent nose was not something native to Europe. However, according to them and their scholars, certain features come from certain groups of people. All of this simply promotes confusion, as both the Yayoi invaders and the people of Russia come from the same stock of their patriarch, Japheth. Yet, they look completely different. This also puts the wide nose as a feature of a pure, so-called black person. And any deviation of this nose denotes a mixed lineage. That would then mean that most of the so-called black people in the Western Hemisphere are all mixed with Caucasians? Is that the explanation of why we do not have wide noses? Well, according to some, yes, it is the reason. Are you beginning to see how little this actually makes sense? So, let me ask you, does having certain features truly tell you about your forefathers? In a way, I suppose it does. But limiting everyone to 5 racial categories would be no different than denouncing the lineages spoken about in the Holy Bible. So, what happened to the Jomon people? The Jomon people's history, like the history of the natives of America, seems to be well hidden. As much as the Japanese government wants to hide who they are, they don't have much choice other than to allow certain bits of information slip through the cracks. There were 2 main known Jomon groups, the Emishi and the Ainu. The Emishi, first mentioned as the hairy people, were one of these Jomon archetypes. The Emishi were a group of people who inhabited what is called Japan today. There is not one single person who on paper or orally descends from the Emishi. Of course, that does not mean that there is literally none, as there is no end to all people. And simply looking at the Japanese population, you will see that some of them do not look like the typical Japanese person.
So one of the things I've noticed throughout my many years of researching African history, cultures, and kingdoms and languages, I noticed that they bear striking similarities to Japanese. One of the most obvious similarities is that nearly every Japanese word and every African word ends in a vowel. And by African, I'm referring more particularly to, but not specifically to, Niger-Congo languages. The rare few words in these languages that do not end in vowels almost always end with the letter N. Another similarity is, unlike most other languages of East Asia, Japanese is a tonal language. However, given the specific part of Asia that Japanese lies, there are very few tonal languages in the surrounding areas. Contrary to Africa, where nearly every language within sub-Saharan Africa is tonal. And if you don't know what a tonal language is, as opposed to European languages such as English, German, and French, tonal languages are strongly reliant on the way you say a word, the tone of your voice when you say the word. One good example of this would be Mandarin Chinese. In this language, the word ma has 4 different meanings, from mother, hemp, horse, and scold. If you say the word ma at a high tone, it would mean mother. If you say it at a tone that starts high and ends low, it would mean scold. Tonal languages such as these are most commonly found in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Japan, however, doesn't lie within any of these regions. The Japanese language is quite an oddity in comparison to most East Asian languages. In fact, the Japanese language is considered a language isolate. What this means is that it cannot be linked to any specific greater language family, such as Afroasiatic, Sino-Tibetan, or Indo-European. Thus, its origins are unknown. Other language isolates include the Sango language of Central African Republic and the Basque language of Spain. Linguists generally have no idea where language isolates have their origins, due to the fact that aside from a few loan words from nearby languages, they don't have any relation to any language families in the entire world. With that being said, since language is one of the primary means of linking one culture to the next, Japanese, being an isolated language, its origins remain a mystery. I do want to bring up again that I don't know Japanese, nor do I know any African languages. So I'm aware that the similarities that I see and hear within the languages may simply just be skin deep. However, another one of the more obvious parallels between Japanese and African languages is just the similarity in words, names, and places. Though I had already noticed this before, I brought up this discussion to one of my Nigerian friends who belongs to the Yoruba ethnic group. And despite the fact that he is a native speaker of the Yoruba language, even he can see the similarities between the two languages. I'm sure you also noticed that during this conversation, I brought up the fact that Edo was the historical name shared between the Benin Empire and the Japanese. The modern-day West African city of Edo is now known as Benin City, and the modern-day Japanese version of Edo is now known as Tokyo. What's even more striking is that in the year 1457, the city of Edo was built in Japan, just 13 years prior to the city being renamed to Edo in the Benin Empire. So for several centuries, two kingdoms that were half the world away from each other shared the same name for their capital cities. And by the way, the friend that I mentioned previously, I'll leave a link to his YouTube channel in the description. I couldn't help but notice that even his name sounds Japanese. Also, the name of the character of my soon-to-be animated series is named Kanoro, which people often mistake for Japanese. Many examples of this can be found all throughout Africa. For example, the largest West African empire in history was known as the Songhai, which sounds remarkably Asian. Then you have the capital city of Somali, known as Mogadishu. Here's a list of some Yoruba words that I have compared side by side next to Japanese words. I also came across this list of Igbo words. Lastly guys, before I get to my last topic, again I'm going to reiterate again and again and again. This is not trying to say that Africans founded Japan or blah 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 blah, all the other stuff that, you know, the We Was Kang stuff. This isn't any of that, okay? Just making that clear. I'm just going to briefly discuss the possibility of pre-colonial contact. So the first question would be, were Africans capable of sailing to Japan, or vice versa? And the answer to this question would be yes. Though the Japanese did have ships capable of making fairly long voyages across the sea, they were used almost exclusively within the confines of the Japanese and the Chinese coastlines. And it wasn't until the Portuguese arrived in the 15th century, whom the Japanese referred to as the Nanban, literally translating to southern barbarians, that the Japanese made any serious efforts into building their own fleets of ships. Unlike the Japanese, many West African states had fairly sizable navies. However, they consisted almost exclusively of small river canoes and sailboats. So the tradition of sailing the seas was all but inexistent in West Africa. One exception to this would be the navy of the Mali Empire, which allegedly consisted of a fleet of over 2,000 ships, as described in an article published by BBC known as Africa's Greatest Explorer. In East Africa, on the other hand, the case was quite different. Sailing the seas and trading with lands as far away as China was an ancient practice for East Africans, and was done on a boat of indigenous origin known as the Mtepe. Which, by the way, if you'd like to know more about these ancient East African sailors, please check out part 3 of my Cities Built by Africans series, which I'll link at the end of this video. Though there is no historical documentation verifying any contact between East Africans and Japanese, it is very well possible that they may have made it to Japan in ancient times. Lastly, I'll go over some very surprising similarities between West African and Japanese art and architecture. In Western architecture, a building is usually constructed and it's surrounded by a yard or a garden. East Asians and West Africans, on the other hand, share a different type of architecture in which they construct their buildings around the yard. These courtyard-based structures were also similar in the fact that they both utilized large amounts of wood in their construction, more specifically in the pillars, and that they were built largely without the use of nails, instead relying on lashings, sockets, and holes. And the final thing I would like to discuss is artwork found within West Africa and Japan. In addition to the Yoruba language sharing similarities with the Japanese, I also find that some of their sculptures display very Asiatic characteristics. These sculptures date back from the 14th century and they were created by the Yoruba people from a kingdom known as Ife. And though some West Africans naturally do have Asiatic features, I've just always found it strange how so many of these heads consistently display these Asiatic characteristics, such as wide faces, high cheekbones, and almond-shaped eyes. Here's a side-by-side comparison of a Japanese sculpture and a Yoruba sculpture. Maybe it's just me, but their features are definitely extremely similar and the overall art style is extremely similar.
The Ainu people of Hokkaido, Sapporo, north of Japan, are mixed descendants of the Jomon people. Many have mixed down with the Yayoi people in some sort of way, but of course not all. Many of them have been allowed to keep their culture and traditions in their limited designated place. At least, now they are. The Ainu people were and still are persecuted as a racial minority in Japan, usually discouraged from speaking their language or keeping their culture intact. They were, and still are, looked down upon by the general Japanese population. As a play on their name, the Ainus were called Inus, the Japanese word for dogs. At the start of the 20th century, the Ainu language was suppressed by the majority of the Japanese. Their settlements were uprooted. They were forced to assimilate as lower-class Japanese. They were kicked out of their land and given lands and neighborhoods that were often looked down upon by the Japanese. In fact, these Yayoi invaders, who are now called Japanese, go so far as to allow other groups from China and Korea to pretend that they are indigenous to Japan to further downplay the original people of Japan. They put people with heavy Yayoi features as the face of the Ainu people when a decent amount still seem to have their original Jomon phenotype. This does not even account for the people all across Japan who may not identify with being an Aborigine, but are actually paternal descendants of them. In the past, the self-esteem of the Ainu people has reached so low that they prefer to breed with people who have more Yayoi features. For a long time, they began to develop a considerable amount of self-hatred, mimicking their oppressors in many ways. I find it ironic that many Asians today try to get surgeries to look more quote-unquote Western, with eyelid surgeries and nose bridge surgeries. With what happened to these people, can one truly believe that these are actually Caucasians? How could such rich lands be given to Japheth? Why would Japheth steal lands from Japheth, then attempt to hide the identity of Japheth? The numerous similar attacks done to the American Aborigines is almost too devious to be true. It is as if the world is confederate in hiding the identity of a common group of people. The pottery of these Jomon people tells a similar story. With thicker lips and broader faces, we are given a better understanding of what these people may have originally looked like. In 1869, the Japanese government unilaterally took away all the land of the Ainu people and changed the name of their homeland to Hokkaido. Yupo Ebe, the deputy head of the Ainu Association of Hokkaido, said the Japanese government's efforts to conceal what actually happened to the Ainu people make him angry. In 1869, the Japanese government unilaterally took away all the land of the Ainu people and changed the name of their homeland to Hokkaido without the consent of the only residents on the island. The government then started to colonize Hokkaido and prohibited the Ainu from expressing their culture or from carrying out any of their traditional forms of hunting, fishing, and gathering. They even forced them to change their names. By the 1880s, the Ainu were being starved to death because of the regulations and the government's assimilation policies. The introduction of the Protection Act was designed to turn a people who had fished and hunted for generations into a farming community by giving them land. But the land they gave to the Ainus wasn't even suitable for farming. Some of our favorite entertainment is heavily based on pre-Yayoi Japan, told through a Eurocentric lens of a blue-eyed, fair-skinned race. If the people of North Japan have gone through hell with the murderous Mongols of the Northeast, one could only imagine what has happened to the people of Okinawa. Similar to the original Jomon people of Japan, the people of Okinawa are very different looking than the main Japanese population, keeping much of their Jomon features. Mai Yoshikawa, an Okinawan photographer, stated in one of her interviews as follows: "At the time when I was photographing, many Okinawans had the impression that black people are good at dancing, sex, and were poor." When also referring to these black American soldiers, Ishikawa also said, as quoted, "American soldiers were very cheerful and self-assured to the point of arrogance. They didn't care how people saw them. They said and did whatever they wanted to do. I think that is very good compared to the Japanese who try to conform to society. They were closer to my personality, and so it was very easy to live with US soldiers." Okinawa, which used to be the independent Ryukyu Kingdom, was annexed by force in 1879 by Japan. The Japanese stated that Ryukyu is over. Now this is Okinawa Prefecture. And the Ryukyu Kingdom, which lasted for 500 years, was dismantled and made part of Japan. That history, the relations between Okinawans and the Japanese, the history of black people and their relations with white people, I think they are very similar. I think that sympathy is a big reason why I like black people more and more." End quote. Could the familiarity that Ishikawa felt with so-called black American soldiers be more than personality similarities or similar oppressive historical events regarding both of their ethnic groups? I will leave that to you to answer. Okinawans have their own culture, language, and history. They are also ethnically different from the Japanese as they have more Jomon ancestry. The false idea that Okinawans are Japanese ethnically comes from the Meiji era, as the Imperial Japanese government sought to destroy the Ryuan identity and to assimilate the Ryuan people, which includes the Okinawans, into mainstream Japanese culture. This misunderstanding of who the Okinawans are also comes from the fact that today's Japanese government still refuses to recognize the Ryukins as an indigenous ethnic group. They also label Ryukyu languages as Japanese dialects, despite the lack of mutuality between the two. The reason why the Japanese government does these things to the Ryukyu people is due to quote-unquote political reasons. They want to control the Ryukyu Islands due to its strategic location, and it would be much more difficult to maintain it if the Ryukyus had a much greater sense of self-identity. Labeling the Ryukyu people as Japanese is much more convenient for Japanese officials, even though it is not the truth. Okinawa also makes up a mere 0.6% of Japan's total landmass, but holds more than 70% of the US bases. Many Okinawans actively protest these US bases, citing reasons such as higher crime rates, lesser punishments for those crimes, pollution, prostitution, rape, and so on. In fact, the price of a prostitute from Okinawa is the cheapest you will find in all of Japan. 1 Nephi, chapter 19, verse 14. And because they turned their hearts aside, saith the prophet, and have despised the Holy One of Israel, they shall wander in the flesh, and perish, and become a hiss and a byword, and be hated among all nations. The Ita, translated as an abundance of filth, are synonymous with the Burakumin. The Burakumin, from the words Buraku, are supposedly not an ethnic minority, according to sources, but rather a caste or descent-based group. They therefore share with other Japanese the same language, religion, customs, and physical appearances. At its origins, the Burakumin were exempt from the social laws of the land. Physical contact with the outside world was strictly taboo. If they were found to have committed a crime, then a samurai would have the authority to execute them. It seems to me that the Ainu people also just so happen to have been treated the exact same way as these ghetto Burakumin people, whose title is supposedly inclusive to any demographic. Oh, except for when it's by lineage. In extreme circumstances, they must tolerate everything from hate mail to potential employer screening applications as a mean of weeding out, quote unquote, anyone they perceive as undesirable. This is done by means of lineage. Religious discrimination was also an issue among certain Buddhist sects during the 60s and the 70s regarding the Burakumin. Is it not odd that this group, that is not ethnically homogeneous whatsoever, faces religious discrimination if they follow a type of Buddhism that is not mainstream? I also find it ridiculous that an employer would weed out someone because they descend from a garbage man. So it makes me ask, who do some of these people truly descend from? Quote, of all the groups and organizations outside the Buraku community to offer its members safe harbor, one stands out as the most unlikely. According to the 1986 book Yakuza, the explosive account of Japan's criminal underworld, the Burakumin were believed to make up nearly 3/4 of the Yamaguchi Gumi, the largest crime syndicate in the country. On closer inspection, this is not as surprising as you might expect. The Buraku often have nowhere to go when shunned by society, and the Yakuza offers a sense of identity, discipline, and family that they would struggle to find elsewhere. Furthermore, the outcast status of the Burakumin means that they have kindred spirits among the tattooed gangsters who find themselves turned away from public baths and banks. Korean immigrants finance the Yakuza while the Burakumin do the groundwork. The Zionists took over the Yakuza and Japan in the late 80s and 90s, and they direct and control their activities. To summarize, a terrorist gang organization recruits mostly an oppressed class, makes them the ground workers, and are ultimately ran by the face rats wearing small hats. But of course, who else could be the bastion and driver of evil deeds like the Fukushima cover-up? It seems like wherever there are oppressed people, there are oppressors full of intent and full of channeled hatred, whose only concern is domination, control, and riches. They truly are true to the prophecy of maintaining the fatness of the earth. In the fourth edition of On Being Different, Diversity and Multiculturalism in North America Mainstream, it states, the majority of the Japanese define themselves by opposition to others, whether minority groups in their own nation or outsiders, anyone who is not us. The not us should stay that way. Assimilation is generally discouraged. Why Japanese people are seen as racist by outsiders? I suppose you can thank their collectivistic and radical identity-based culture. And while there is nothing wrong with nationalism, when based on a false premise of being born on this land during this time, it seems very hypocritical. Most of the people today in Japan, by those same standards, aren't truly Japanese themselves, as many of their forefathers are invaders of other lands. Sound familiar? The Burakumin and other Japanese minorities are also likely to have careers in crime, prostitution, entertainment, and sports. What the Burakumin have gone through and are still going through is very similar, almost identical to the struggle of African Americans in the United States. African Americans have endured slavery, discrimination, and hostile segregation, to name a few. With the influence of the media, Japan has adopted the Western's view of African Americans. Japanese contacts with Africans and later so-called African Americans were limited compared to their encounters with whites. Their exposure to Western discourse about them was less limited, and shaped how Japanese would perceive blacks when they actually encountered them." End quote. However, I don't believe that they can let Westerns take all the credit, as they were mistreating the indigenous people of those lands first. All they did was simply expand it to so-called African Americans. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book." even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. The Book of Mormon's prophecies and precepts pushed me into looking into possible Israelites scattered to the Pacific Islands. My findings expressed in this video are only the beginning. I challenge you, the listener, to help me connect these puzzle pieces together and lend out a hand to our lost brothers and sisters. Fishing season is almost over. Perhaps if we can fish those last couple of people on these islands, we can move on to the next phase of our destiny. If I do decide to make a part 2, I plan to discuss the Hebrew origins of the Shinto religion, the Israelites and the Buddhist religion of India, and the Israelites' departure from the Assyrian captivity and their spread throughout Asia, or what I call the land of Sinim. Be the change you want to see. Shalom to the 12 and to the Isles of the Sea.